It was a quiet evening in the city. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, painting the streets with a soft orange glow. Chuck Norris, dressed in his usual casual attire, a dark jacket, plain t-shirt, and jeans, walked calmly down the sidewalk. He had just finished picking up a few groceries and was heading home. His demeanor was relaxed, almost unassuming, but every step carried the confidence of someone who had seen and survived far more than most people could imagine. As he passed a dimly lit alley, a group of young men lounging nearby noticed him. Their eyes narrowed, not because of anything Chuck had done, but because of who he was, or rather, how he looked to them. They whispered among themselves, smirking and sizing him up. One of them, slightly taller and more aggressive than the rest, stepped forward and sneered. "Hey, what are you doing around here, old man?" he barked. The others laughed. Their tone was mocking, racist, and meant to intimidate. Chuck stopped and looked at them, his calm gaze meeting theirs. There was no fear in his eyes, only a quiet awareness. "Just heading home," Chuck replied in his deep, measured voice. "Nothing to worry about." The leader of the gang chuckled, stepping closer. "Yeah, right. Don't act like you belong here. We don't like your kind around." Chuck's jaw tightened slightly, but he didn't raise his voice. Instead, he let a brief pause stretch between them, letting the tension grow naturally. Around them, a few pedestrians noticed the confrontation and slowed down. Some took out their phones, ready to record. The gang, emboldened by the small audience, circled Chuck, trying to make him uncomfortable. Chuck glanced at the streetlights flickering above, then at the group in front of him. He knew exactly who he was dealing with, not individually, but the type, reckless, arrogant, and unaware of consequences. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the space between himself and the gang leader, and kept his voice calm, almost soothing. "Gentlemen," he said, "you might want to rethink your behavior. Tonight might not go the way you expect." A ripple of unease passed through the gang. They laughed nervously, thinking it was a bluff. Little did they know, they were about to awaken someone far more dangerous than they could imagine. What happens next will shock everyone watching, and the gang has no idea what they've just triggered. The gang, still smirking, thought they had the upper hand. They circled Chuck like predators testing a prey, cracking jokes meant to belittle him. "You think you can just walk here like you own the place?" One of them jeered, stepping closer. The others laughed, bumping into Chuck intentionally, trying to provoke a reaction. Chuck remained calm, his hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't flinch. Instead, he let his eyes scan each of them, calculating every movement. Every laugh, every shove, every threat. It all registered, but he stayed perfectly composed. To the casual observer, he looked like a quiet man being harassed. But underneath, his mind was already several steps ahead. "Listen," Chuck said in a voice that was low and steady. "You're wasting your energy. This doesn't need to escalate." The gang leader, a tall man with a jagged scar across his cheek, sneered. "Oh, we're escalating, old man. You don't tell us what to do." He reached out to push Chuck's shoulder again. Chuck didn't move backward. Instead, he stepped slightly to the side, letting the leader's hand slide past him without resistance, a ghost-like maneuver that seemed almost instinctive. The leader stumbled slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "What the?" one of the younger gang members muttered, clearly unsettled. The tension was mounting. Pedestrians had slowed down, some taking out their phones. A few whispered to each other, "Who is this guy? Why isn't he scared?" Others just watched, unsure if they should intervene or keep their distance. Chuck's calmness was unnerving. The more the gang tried to provoke him, the more he remained unshaken. The leader raised his voice. "We don't take kindly to your type here. You're gonna regret stepping into our street." His tone was dripping with menace, a warning meant to intimidate. Chuck tilted his head slightly, his eyes locking onto the man. "Regret comes from your own choices, not mine," he said evenly. "And your choices are reckless." The crowd around them murmured. Some phones started recording, capturing the unfolding scene. One young woman whispered, "He's not like the others, he's not scared at all." The gang didn't notice the growing unease in themselves yet. Emboldened by the audience, they continued, shoving, shouting, trying to make Chuck flinch. But he didn't. Every time someone lunged or stepped aggressively, Chuck's reflexes were already predicting their movements, adjusting his stance ever so slightly to maintain control. A teenager in the group spat on the ground near Chuck. Chuck looked down, then back at the gang. "Is that really necessary?" he asked, calm, but with a tone that suggested patience might be running thin. The gang laughed nervously, thinking he was just a passive man who could be mocked endlessly. Chuck noticed a few of the bystanders whispering to each other. One of them pointed toward him, recognition dawning. But for now, the gang remained unaware of his legendary reputation. The leader took a step closer, lowering his voice in a threatening whisper. "You better watch yourself. You have no idea who you're messing with." Chuck smiled faintly, not a smile of humor, but of controlled power. "On the contrary," he replied, "I know exactly who I'm dealing with. And that's why I'm giving you a chance to walk away." The tension in the air was almost tangible. The gang members began to hesitate, sensing something they couldn't quite identify. Chuck's calmness contrasted sharply with their growing panic, but they were too proud to back down. If you were witnessing this, what city or country would you be watching from? Comment below. Would you step in, or let it play out? The gang leader, growing impatient, tried to intimidate Chuck one last time. "Enough talk. We're taking care of you right now." He lunged forward, swinging a fist aimed at Chuck's chest. Chuck didn't dodge with brute force. He simply shifted his weight, letting the punch pass harmlessly, his movements almost like a shadow. The leader stumbled slightly, confused by the ease with which Chuck avoided the attack. The gang froze for a moment. The bystanders gasped. Phones zoomed in, capturing the eerie calm of Chuck standing there, untouched and composed, while the aggressor's swing missed completely. A few whispers spread through the crowd. "Who is this guy? How is he doing that?" The gang's confidence was wavering. For the first time, their arrogance faltered. Chuck's quiet demeanor, combined with his subtle mastery of movement, made them realize that they were no longer in control. Chuck took a deliberate step forward, closing the small space between himself and the gang leader. "You can continue this, or you can leave. The choice is yours," he said softly, but every word carried the weight of someone who had mastered lethal skill. The leader's bravado faltered. The crowd could feel the shift. The predator had become the hunted, though none yet realized the full extent of Chuck's capabilities. And at that moment, every person watching knew things were about to get very real. The alley was now alive with the sound of shouts and taunts. Chuck Norris stood in the center, calm as ever, while the gang circled him like wolves closing in. The streetlights cast long shadows across the cracked pavement, flickering in rhythm with the rising tension. Every passerby felt the heaviness in the air, the kind that signals something dangerous is about to happen. The gang leader, still trying to assert control, jabbed his finger toward Chuck. "Listen here, you think you're better than us? We run these streets." Chuck's gaze didn't waver. His voice remained steady and measured. "I'm not better than anyone. I just don't waste time on meaningless fights." The gang laughed, but there was a nervous edge creeping into their tone. One of the younger members, visibly rattled, muttered under his breath, "Something's not right about this guy." The leader snapped, taking a step closer. "You gonna talk back all night? Or are we gonna teach you a lesson?" Before Chuck could respond, one of the gang members shoved him aggressively. The push was meant to provoke, to test his patience. Chuck's body shifted just slightly, almost imperceptibly, and the shove slid off him as if he were made of stone. The gang member stumbled forward, off balance, eyes wide with confusion. "Hey, that's not fair," he shouted, regaining his footing. Chuck's calmness only made the gang angrier. The leader barked orders. "Come on, all of you. Don't let him get away with staring at us like that." They lunged together, surrounding him tighter, each movement filled with aggression and malice. Chuck didn't fight back yet. He stood in the center, steady and composed, like a rock in the middle of a storm. But every subtle movement he made, shifting his weight, adjusting his stance, was calculated. To the naked eye, it looked like patience. But to anyone who could read body language, it was preparation. A crowd of bystanders had gathered. Phones out, recording, whispering. "Who is this guy?" one asked. Another whispered, "Why isn't he scared? Look at how calm he is." The gang leader, frustrated by the lack of reaction, pulled a baseball bat from behind his back. "Maybe this will teach you respect," he shouted, swinging it menacingly. Chuck's eyes flicked to the bat. He didn't flinch. Instead, he moved with a subtle shift, letting the bat miss him by mere inches, his stance unbroken. The impact barely scratched the pavement, but the sound was enough to make the leader freeze for a split second. That didn't even touch him, one gang member muttered, disbelief creeping into his voice. Chuck finally spoke, calm but commanding. Violence is a choice. You're free to make it. But know that I don't react recklessly. The gang laughed nervously, but their bravado was slipping. One member whispered to another, maybe we messed up. This guy's not normal. Chuck's eyes scanned the alley. He noted every escape route, every weak stance in the gang's formation, every movement that could turn aggressive. His family-like calm contrasted sharply with the chaos around him. If you were here, what would you do? Would you step in or back away? Comment below. The gang, unwilling to show fear, tried a new tactic. Two of them grabbed chairs from a nearby cafe and swung them toward Chuck, hoping to intimidate him. Chuck didn't move aggressively. Instead, he sidestepped with effortless precision, letting the chairs pass harmlessly, his movements fluid and controlled. The gang's confidence faltered further. The alley was silent for a moment. Even the spectators were holding their breath, sensing something beyond ordinary in Chuck's calm demeanor. The gang members were starting to realize that their arrogance might have led them into dangerous territory. The leader's face turned red with frustration. I said enough, he yelled, lunging forward himself. Chuck didn't flinch. He simply shifted, letting the leader stumble slightly on his own momentum. The leader's eyes widened in alarm as the subtle but undeniable skill in Chuck's movements became apparent. Chuck's voice cut through the tension like a blade. You've made a choice to escalate. That's fine. But understand, you don't know what you're dealing with. The crowd gasped. Phones zoomed in. Some spectators whispered in awe. He's not joking. This is serious. The gang froze for just a moment. Enough time for the tension to become almost unbearable. Chuck's calm was no longer ordinary. It was unsettling. They were beginning to feel the weight of what they had provoked. The scene was set. The gang's pride and aggression were about to meet precision, control, and the deadly skill of a man they had underestimated completely. And no one watching, not the crowd, not the gang, could yet imagine what was about to happen. The alley seemed smaller now, the air thick with tension. Chuck Norris stood perfectly still, his posture relaxed yet alert, like a predator aware of every movement around him. The gang, still fueled by arrogance, didn't realize the danger they had invited into their midst. Every laugh and jeer now carried a hint of nervousness, but pride kept them from backing down. The leader's hands were shaking slightly as he clenched his fists. We're going to teach you a lesson tonight, old man, he said, his voice attempting to sound menacing but faltering under Chuck's calm gaze. Chuck looked at him, almost pitying the man. A lesson? He asked quietly. And what exactly do you think that will accomplish? The gang scoffed, but their movements were now slightly hesitant. Chuck's eyes flicked to the tallest member swinging a chain in a wide arc. With the slightest shift of his weight, Chuck stepped just enough to avoid the swing, letting it crack against the empty air. The sound was sharp, echoing down the alley, and for the first time, a flicker of fear crossed the gang member's face. Did you see that? One whispered to another. He didn't even touch him, and we. Don't stop now, the leader barked. Finish him. Two gang members advanced at the same time, one with a metal pipe, the other with a broken bottle. Chuck didn't panic. He didn't flinch. He shifted ever so slightly, and their attacks missed, clipping nothing but shadows. To anyone watching, it almost looked like luck, but the crowd began to notice the precision in his movements. Each step, each subtle turn, seemed calculated, effortless, and deadly in its economy. A young spectator, hidden behind a parked car, whispered into his phone, "Guys, this isn't normal. Look at him. He's dodging like a fighter." Chuck spoke again, his voice calm but carrying authority. "You've made a lot of mistakes tonight. The first is thinking violence is the answer. The second, underestimating me." The gang froze, momentarily unsettled. The leader's nostrils flared. "Underestimating you? Who are you even?" Chuck didn't answer directly. Instead, he shifted his stance, pivoting slightly to the side, just enough to let the leader's fist glance past him harmlessly. The leader's face turned pale, though he tried to mask it with a sneer. Another gang member swung a chain wildly, desperate to regain control. Chuck's movements were minimal, a subtle lean, a barely perceptible step back, but the chain whistled through the air and struck the wall behind him with a loud clang. The gang began to realize that this man wasn't just defending himself. He was orchestrating every movement, controlling the pace and flow without breaking a sweat. "Something's not right," muttered the tallest member, lowering his weapon slightly. Chuck's eyes scanned the group, noting weak stances, misaligned grips, and moments of hesitation. His calmness contrasted with the gang's rising panic. One misstep, and they would face consequences they hadn't even imagined. If you were watching this live, could you stay calm like Chuck? Or would you freeze in fear? Comment below. The leader lunged again, more aggressively this time, aiming a punch at Chuck's midsection. Chuck's movements were subtle, just a micro step to the side, barely noticeable, but the punch missed entirely. The impact was only air. The leader's fist trembled in midair, and the young gang members exchanged worried glances. Chuck spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Violence is easy. Control is harder." The crowd of onlookers gasped. Some whispered in awe. Others pulled their phones closer, capturing every moment. Even the gang's bravest were starting to feel that their overconfidence might have been a fatal error. Chuck's posture never changed, but his eyes now held a quiet intensity, a hint that the man they thought was an ordinary target was in fact someone far beyond their reckoning. Every subtle dodge, every calculated movement, was like a warning. Underestimate him at your own peril. The leader's voice cracked slightly. Who are you?" he stammered. Chuck didn't answer immediately. He let the question hang in the air, a silent but deadly threat. The gang's laughter had died down completely. Their bravado was slipping, replaced by a growing sense of dread. In that moment, the bystanders felt it too. A man in perfect control of himself, unconsciously asserting dominance over the chaos, a storm beneath a calm exterior. Chuck's legend, though still unknown to the gang, was beginning to reveal itself through sheer presence and skill. And as the gang took another hesitant step forward, none of them realized that tonight, their arrogance had just put them on the path of a reckoning far more precise and unstoppable than they could ever imagine. The alley was now eerily silent, except for the faint hum of distant traffic. Chuck Norris stood at the center, his calm demeanor unbroken, eyes scanning every member of the gang. The tension was palpable. The gang, once brimming with arrogance and aggression, now fidgeted nervously. Even the leader, still trying to maintain control, had a tremor in his hand. "You've made a lot of mistakes tonight," Chuck said softly, each word deliberate and measured. "Your first mistake was thinking you could intimidate me." The gang exchanged uneasy glances. One of the younger members whispered, "Did he just threaten us?" The leader glared, trying to hide his growing panic. "Ignore him. Just hit him." The leader lunged first, throwing a reckless punch at Chuck's midsection. But Chuck was ready. With the slightest shift of his weight, he sidestepped, letting the fist sail harmlessly past him. The leader stumbled forward, barely catching his balance, eyes widening in shock. "You see," Chuck continued, his voice steady, almost calm, "violence without control is pointless." Two more gang members tried to grab him from behind, swinging chains and bottles. Chuck moved with precise, minimal adjustments. A lean here, a slight pivot there, and their attacks connected with nothing but air. One chain cracked loudly against the wall, startling them. For the first time, a flicker of fear crossed their faces. The crowd that had gathered grew silent, mesmerized. Phones were raised, capturing every subtle movement. "He's dodging everything, like it's nothing," whispered one onlooker. Another whispered, "Is this real? He's not even touching them, and they can't hit him." Chuck took a deliberate step forward, closing the distance between himself and the leader. His stance was relaxed, yet every inch radiated controlled power. He didn't swing wildly, he didn't shout. Every movement was calculated. The leader raised a crowbar, swinging it in a wide arc. Chuck shifted his weight just slightly, letting the arc pass harmlessly. The sound of metal striking the alley wall echoed loudly. "You're wasting energy," Chuck said quietly. "Let me show you the difference between reckless force and control." And then, in a movement so precise it looked effortless, Chuck delivered a single, controlled strike to the nearest gang member. The man went down, incapacitated but unharmed beyond reason. Not a punch thrown in anger, but in perfect technique. The others froze, disbelief plastered across their faces. The leader stepped back, eyes wide, heart pounding. What was that?" Chuck's calm gaze swept the remaining gang members. "Second mistake, underestimating me," he said softly. Another gang member rushed him, wielding a metal pipe. Chuck sidestepped, twisted his body, and used the man's momentum to guide him to the ground without landing a heavy blow, just enough to show mastery. The gang's confidence was gone. They were no longer aggressors. They were spectators in their own defeat. The crowd gasped, phones zooming in to catch the awe-inspiring sight. Some muttered, He's a professional, a master." The leader, panicking, shouted, "Enough! All of you, take him down now." But by now, hesitation had infected the group. Their fear was palpable. Every move Chuck made was precise, controlled, and almost surgical. Chuck stepped forward again, voice low but commanding. "Final mistake, thinking you're in control. You're not. Respect is earned, not demanded through fear." In a matter of seconds, he neutralized 2 more members with expert, controlled maneuvers. The gang's momentum had completely shifted. Their aggression had met perfect control, and they could feel, for the first time, that they were hopelessly outmatched. One member finally dropped his weapon, trembling. Another fell to his knees, realizing the error of their arrogance. Even the leader's hands were shaking uncontrollably now. Chuck didn't gloat. He didn't taunt. He simply stood, composed, letting the lessons sink in. Arrogance, aggression, and prejudice would not go unchallenged. The crowd erupted in whispers and murmurs. That was unbelievable. He's not even trying to hurt them, and they're terrified. Phones continued to roll, capturing the viral moment. Chuck's eyes scanned the alley one final time. "Learn from this," he said softly, "because disrespect comes with consequences." He straightened, calm as ever, leaving the gang in shock, humbled, and thoroughly defeated without a hint of malice in his actions. The gang thought they knew who they were attacking, but they had no idea they were facing a professional, and the next revelation would shock everyone, including them. The alley had fallen into a tense, almost surreal silence. The gang, once brimming with arrogance, was now scattered in fear. Chuck Norris stood at the center, calm and composed, his eyes scanning each member as if reading their thoughts. The night air carried the scent of asphalt, sweat, and a growing sense of dread. The leader, pale and shaking, glanced at his remaining men. What is he stammered. His voice betrayed the fear that had been building ever since Chuck had moved with perfect precision, neutralizing each of them without a hint of aggression. Chuck didn't answer immediately. He let the silence stretch, letting the weight of his presence sink in. The gang had thought they were in control. Now, they could see, clearly, that they were not. Every micro-movement, every subtle dodge, every precise step Chuck had taken wasn't luck. It was mastery. One of the gang members, wide-eyed and trembling, muttered, He's not human." The others swallowed hard, realizing their overconfidence had brought them face to face with someone far beyond their comprehension. Chuck finally spoke, his voice calm but commanding. "You made your choices tonight. You chose arrogance, violence, and disrespect. You've seen the consequences of underestimating someone you know nothing about." The leader raised his hands, his voice quivering. We didn't know who you were. Please, we'll leave." Chuck's gaze softened slightly, but the power behind it remained undeniable. "It's not about who I am. It's about respect. You don't earn it through fear, intimidation, or prejudice. You earn it through your actions." A bystander, who had been filming the entire confrontation, whispered to another, I think this is Chuck Norris. The real Chuck Norris." The revelation spread through the crowd. Gasps, murmurs, and whispers cascaded as the realization dawned. The man they had thought was an ordinary passerby, their victim, was a legendary figure, a master fighter, and someone capable of far more than they had imagined. The gang's panic reached its peak. The leader backed toward the wall, eyes darting for escape. We didn't mean any harm," he stammered. The other members were trembling, weapons lowered, adrenaline coursing through their veins as they processed the magnitude of their mistake. Chuck took a deliberate step forward, closing the gap without aggression. Each movement was controlled, precise, and authoritative. He could end the situation completely, but he chose restraint. "You've been taught a lesson tonight," he said quietly. "Not because I wanted to, but because your choices forced it." One gang member, shaking uncontrollably, dropped his weapon entirely. Another knelt, head bowed, silently acknowledging defeat. The leader, realizing that his bravado had brought him to the brink, finally dropped to his knees as well, surrendering completely. The crowd, witnessing the entire event, erupted in whispers of awe. Phones were recording, capturing Chuck's unmatched skill and composure. Some spectators cheered quietly, others stared in disbelief. "That was insane. He didn't even need to hit them hard," someone whispered. Chuck surveyed the scene, making sure everyone was stable and unharmed beyond the precise control he had exerted. His calmness and restraint sent a message that power without control was meaningless. The gang had learned, in moments, what arrogance and prejudice could cost. If you were watching this unfold, what would you do? Could you stay calm like Chuck, or would you panic? Comment below. As the gang scrambled to leave the alley, humiliated and chastened, Chuck turned his gaze to the crowd. "Remember," he said softly but firmly, "respect isn't demanded. It's earned. And judging someone by their appearance or underestimating them is always a mistake." The crowd erupted in quiet applause. Phones captured every detail. The gang, now retreating into the night, had learned the ultimate lesson. They had chosen poorly, and the consequences had been immediate, but controlled. Chuck had taught them without malice, only through demonstration of skill, restraint, and the quiet power of someone who had mastered himself completely. The bystanders continued to whisper among themselves. "I can't believe it, that was Chuck Norris. The real Chuck Norris. He didn't even seem angry, just precise." The whispers spread quickly, destined to become viral online. Chuck's presence, calm and imposing, remained the center of attention. The alley returned to its quiet state, but the impact of what had just occurred lingered. Those who had witnessed it would never forget. Underestimating someone like Chuck Norris came at a high price, even if he chose not to strike with full force. The night had revealed a truth. Arrogance and prejudice are easily punished by someone with skill, discipline, and patience. And Chuck Norris, as always, had proven that restraint, mastery, and calculated action were more powerful than raw aggression. The alley was quiet now, the tension replaced by stunned silence and the occasional whisper from bystanders. Phones were still recording, hands trembling slightly as they captured every detail of the encounter. Chuck Norris stood at the center, calm and collected, surveying the scene one last time. The gang, scattered and humiliated, had fled or were nursing their pride in the shadows. Their arrogance had been shattered, replaced by awe and fear. The realization hit some of the crowd first. They had just witnessed something extraordinary. Chuck's skill, control, and composure had turned a dangerous situation into a lesson in respect and restraint. Social media notifications buzzed across phones as videos began to upload, slow at first, then rapidly gaining traction. Clips of Chuck neutralizing the gang, his calm demeanor in the face of hostility, and the moment of revelation that he was indeed Chuck Norris were shared across platforms within minutes. Comments flooded in. "That's Chuck Norris, no way. He didn't even hit them hard." And they were terrified. This is the definition of respect and control. Incredible. By morning, the story had gone viral. Millions around the world watched, shared, and commented. News outlets picked it up, praising Chuck for his restraint and tactical skill, while also highlighting the dangers of arrogance, prejudice, and underestimating others. The gang's humiliation was broadcast far beyond the alley, a cautionary tale of the consequences of aggression and bias. But Chuck didn't gloat. He didn't seek fame or recognition. His satisfaction came from knowing the lesson had been delivered. Respect, humility, and self-control were principles he valued above all else, and he had demonstrated them perfectly. In interviews later, Chuck remained humble. "I didn't want to hurt anyone," he said. "I only wanted to teach them that judging someone by appearance, race, or reputation is dangerous. Respect is earned, not demanded." The gang, meanwhile, faced the consequences of their actions. One member was suspended from his job after the video went viral, another faced scrutiny at school, and the leader became the subject of widespread ridicule online. Humiliation followed them far beyond the alley, a permanent reminder of what happens when arrogance meets someone with skill, patience, and control. Meanwhile, the public was inspired. Schools, community groups, and social media users highlighted the story, not for violence, but for the moral it carried. Bravery isn't about fighting recklessly. It's about maintaining composure, using skill responsibly, and standing up against disrespect and injustice. Chuck's calm authority and decisive action had become a global lesson in humility and power. The story even sparked debates online. How would people respond in such situations? Could they remain calm under pressure? Viewers around the world shared their thoughts, tagging friends, and encouraging discussion about courage, restraint, and respect. Chuck walked away from the alley as quietly as he had arrived. The city had changed in that small corner, if only for a moment, because someone had acted with precision, discipline, and integrity. The crowd dispersed, some shaking their heads in disbelief, others inspired to reflect on their own behavior. If you believe no one should be judged by appearance, type respect in the comments. Share this story to remind others that humility, skill, and integrity always prevail. And don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. The story became more than just a viral moment. It was a lesson. A moment where arrogance met control, ignorance met awareness, and disrespect met mastery. Chuck Norris had once again proven that true power is not about brute force. It's about skill, patience, and the courage to act with integrity. And as millions of viewers watched, shared, and commented, one thing became clear. Respect, once earned, resonates far beyond any single alley, any single encounter, or any single fight.